afternoon, and welcome to the Society of Wetland Scientists April 2020 webinar, where we'll be learning about the convergence of wetland science and technology. And we're super excited to bring you this webinar to engage you in an e-learning experience with SWS, because during this time, many of you are sequestered at home like I am. And this is sort of our way to stay connected to the wetland community during the global pandemic. So we hope you all are well and you will enjoy this e-learning experience. I'm going to wait till you see the next slide. For those of you who are not familiar with our webinar series, all of our monthly webinars are complimentary to SWS members, and they're usually held on the third Thursday of the month. Once a quarter, we do open up our webinars and offer them for free to non-members and the public. And as you can see on the listing are of our upcoming webinars, and you can also download this from our handouts. It's a webinar flyer. We have both our regular SWS webinar series in English, and we also have quarterly webinars that are offered in Spanish. And our next free quarterly webinar will be held in July 2020. Will be presented by our 2019 Wetland Ambassador, Priyanka Sakar from Assam University in India, and her mentor, Elizabeth Watson from Drexel University in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And before we get started with the presentation today, I'd like to make you aware of an opportunity to support our expanding programs at SWS. In 2020, we opened up the webinar program for sponsorship of our regular SWS webinar series. And we're limiting this to just 4 annual sponsors for maximum impact. And those 4 organizations will be promoted prior to, during, and after our webinars. So if you're interested in learning more and you want to become one of our SWS webinar sponsors, please contact our committee member in charge of the sponsorship program, that's Roy Massaris, at the email listed on this slide, or you can contact SWS office at info@sws.org. And we kicked this off in January, and we already have 2 of our 4 lucky sponsors. And we're proud to announce that our first 2 SWS webinar series sponsors are the Water Resources, Hydrology, and Hydraulics Education Group, which is a nonprofit group that shares information on water resources, hydrologic, and hydraulic engineering to help educate and build a better tomorrow. And that is a Facebook page. And the Whittington Group, which is a natural resource consulting firm that balances regulatory compliance with sound ecological management. And you can find their information at the websites listed on this slide. And it will also be in the handout. My name is Kim Ponzio, and I'm a past president of SWS, and I'm the current chair of the SWS Webinar Committee, and I'm going to be your moderator today. I do want to go over a few housekeeping items to help you have an easy and positive experience on GoToWebinar. So the general format for today's webinar will be a 45-minute presentation by our speaker, followed by approximately 15 minutes for questions. And at any time during the presentation, when the thought pops into your head, you can type your questions into the questions pane, and then I'll pose those to our presenter at the end of the presentation. And this webinar is being recorded, and you'll receive a link to the recording following the webinar. And we also ask that you take a moment to complete the evaluation survey that will help us plan for future events. And if you'd like a copy of today's slides to follow along with or to go back and make notes on for later, please find a PDF copy in the handouts pane. And as well, you can download that flyer of the upcoming SWS webinars. And if you're tech savvy, unlike myself, you can tweet about today's webinar at #SWSwebinar. And we are proud to announce that this webinar has just been pre-approved by the SWS Professional Certification Program. And that means it's applicable for continuing education credits for you. And you can apply those credits to your professional wetland scientist certification or renewal, or any other certifications that require continuing education credits. And to get your participation certificates, now available through an automated process. You should receive an email from our SWS Managing Director, Michelle Chosek, about 1 day after the webinar. So if you don't see that email, make sure to check your spam folder. These certificates are free to SWS members, and they are available for non-members at a nominal cost of $20. Participation certificates are also available if you go to our webinar recordings, and you can see here on the lower part of the slide that you go to our events and past webinars page, and it will take you to all of our past webinars that are posted. I think we have over 50 webinars there now, and the YouTube channel, which is complete with multilingual captions. So it's my distinct pleasure today to introduce our speaker, Jeremy Shavy from Ecobond. Jeremy's niche lies in the delineation of sensitive habitats, wetlands ecology, and responsible stewardship of the Earth's natural resources. From combining earth sciences and technology, raising capital and running successful businesses, to protecting thousands of acres of untouched wilderness, Jeremy lives life to its fullest. As an entrepreneur, a professional ecologist, a botanist, an environmental consultant, and an executive at a tech startup, he has over 17 years of project management experience in the Americas, South Pacific, Middle East, and Europe. Jeremy is passionate and devoted to projects that enable sustainable economic growth, dovetailed with the conservation of the world's natural resources and indigenous rights. He's a problem solver, and he has an innate ability to recognize patterns socially as well as ecologically, geologically, and economically, and how they can be either amplified or tempered as necessary. Jeremy works in the interchange between people and sensitive habitats via wetland delineation, T&E surveys, biological inventories, botanical inventories, environmental impact statements, AIA for PSD applications. You'll have to tell me what that one is, 404 and 401 permits in the United States, and more. And Jeremy has also been heavily involved as an expert witness for sensitive and at-risk projects, as well as indigenous environmental justice projects around the world. So with that, I'll hand control over to Jeremy. Welcome, Jeremy.
Let's see. Looks like I'm having a little delay on the slides. There we go.
Hopefully so Jeremy, oh, okay. There you go.
Jump around. I'm not sure if it froze up for a second. It seems like it's okay for now. So yeah, so I wanted to start. I love quotes. Things pop out to me when I'm reading other literature, and some of you might be familiar with William Pollard. He was an English Quaker writer, philosopher, theologian from the 19th century. And one of the things that this quote really brings up for me is that we are right now at a very critical moment in history as well as our lives. We're in a nexus point, perhaps a significant nexus, if you will. While the rest of the world seems like they're just waking up to the fact that 21st century humanity is still part of biology, many of us as earth scientists have played a really critical role in helping to interpolate and ascend both biotic as well as abiotic information and data to what I would like to call like the new demigods, the internet, the geospatial science, data managed. Because what I believe is that otherwise humanity will continue to divorce itself from the very ship, our planet Earth, that keeps us all afloat. I believe we can help shape the future while still maintaining our scientific integrity and the platforms that we work within, and to continue to promulgate conservation, long-term ecosystem research, and intelligent planning and growth. The climate is changing as we know it, both on the mental level as well as on the global climate level as well. And so the question is, can we adapt with it? So here's what we're going to spend our next 42 minutes talking about. I'm going to do a little brief walk-in in terms of my personal road to my involvement with tech and wetlands, and then speak in focus about the importance of digitizing data. I've already kind of hinted at that. We're going to get a little bit more into that, but the bulk of the focus of what we're going to look at is some existing tech and wetlands, or some of the new cutting edge technology that's being used in wetland science, wetland monitoring, wetland delineations, and also look at some of the new tools that are coming out. And so for each of these categories, from the drones and GPS receivers, et cetera, we're going to look at a particular case study. And so all of these are going to be projects and hardware or software that I have personally worked with, because I'm not going to be able to speak too much to things that I haven't worked with and be able to feel like I'm sharing that information to you with confidence. So I'm going to be sharing directly from my experience with working with a lot of these devices, hardware and software. Some of you, I'm sure, have worked with some or all of them, and so it'll give you a great opportunity just to reflect on what other types of devices are out there, so that you can have that as kind of a backdrop. And then we're gonna wrap up with talking about the importance of wrapping tech around existing workflows. So in our case with wetland science, and a little bit about the probable near future of wetland science, and where things might be going. So we can start here. And most of you, I'm sure, since you are wetland scientists, of course, are very directly tied into the Clean Water Act. All of us are tied in some way or another to this. The other two acts that have been a very big part of the formulation of my career is the Clean Air Act. Kim said something earlier about what a AIA for a PSD is. AIA is an additional impacts assessment for a point source deterioration study. So looking at where, how point source or several point sources can impact ecology, can impact sensitive habitats like wetlands. And of course, most of you probably have some tie-in with endangered species as well. On the far right, I just threw up a few of the logos of the agencies that I have been working with, either as a consultant or as a contractor, or have worked as a liaison with my own customers with. A lot of those are probably ones that you have worked with as well, and there's many others that we could add to that, but this is where a lot of my conversations and development professionally with agencies is rooted. So my background, after I finished school, I worked with the Highlands Biological Station with the University of North Carolina here in Macon County, North Carolina, where we have a 20-acre all-native plant botanical garden, including the high elevation bog. We also have multiple properties that have Southern Appalachian bogs on them. So we do a lot of work with endangered species propagation, as well as watershed assessments, etc. So I worked there for 2 years before getting for a brief stint into the corporate world with environmental quality management based in Cincinnati, Ohio. Here I was doing delineations, T&E studies, also doing biogenic inventories, which also ties into the air dispersion modeling, looking at, again, how potential pollutants of concern can impact or even commingle with volatile organic compounds emitting from natural sources such as trees and wetlands. And we also did a lot of brownfield restoration, stream restorations, and wetland restoration work. So piggybacking off the back of that, I was able to get a couple of contracts over in the European Union, in Ireland, Switzerland, and Finland. And so that's how I started my own business, which is Unaka Environmental. That's named after one of the Cherokee names for the mountains here in Southern Appalachia. And so with Unaka, since 2005, been doing mostly T&E wetland delineations, wetland condition assessments, stream restorations, wetland restoration, and a lot of contracting with U.S. Forest Service and DOT. As a part of that, I was during that about 7 years ago, I was asked to sit on the board for the Cloud Forest Conservation Initiative, which is a US-based nonprofit organization, but our work is concentrated in the highlands of Guatemala, where we have protected 40,000 contiguous acres of primal cloud forest, which, as you can ascertain from the picture here, is also in a karstic region. So there's a lot of caves and some of the biggest sinkholes I have ever seen in my life. And eventually that is what led through strategic planning to the development and the implementation of Ecobond, which is where my current workplace is. I'm still doing a fair amount of biological consulting with DOT and US Forest Service, as well as a few private clients through Ecobond as research and development. But for the most part, I'm focused on working with our team based here in Asheville, North Carolina, to streamline the wetland delineation process. And we're hearing back from customers that we're saving them about 50 to 60% of their time and level of effort on projects. So pretty excited about that. But let's talk a little bit about digitizing data and the importance of that, because that's sort of at the crux of what we're talking about here today when we're looking at the convergence of wetland science and tech. It's critical to understand that in the microclimate that each of us habitate and live in, that a lot of us are fairly fiercely independent and fully capable of remaining so through our research and conservation management and consulting practices. One of the things I love about our community is how much collaboration there is across the board. You don't see that in a lot of other professions. I mean, I love going to the SWS conferences as well as some of the regional things that happen. And I've been a part of the Society for Ecological Restoration for over 10 years. I love seeing people come together. And this is a part of that. But but there's still that fierce individuation. And one of the things that I learned in the process of going from having no acreage protected in the Guatemalan Highlands to, in the last 3 years, protecting over 40,000 contiguous acres, as I spoke into earlier, is that in order to initiate and implement things that are larger than life, such as a large conservation effort like that, I had to be willing, or we have to be willing, to put our own needs to self-individuate or to sustain our own sensitive egos aside for the greater good. And it's with a team that made that happen. A team that speaks 4 languages, that lives in all hemispheres of the planet. But we were united in one purpose, and that was protect what is considered now to be one of the primordial lungs of the earth. And I believe it is our duty as scientists to help to translate biological data into a digital format so that the rest of humanity, which just continues to barrel into the 21st century, almost entirely divorced from biological connection to the earth, will be able to find this data that we can put in the proper locations. They're basically portals to reconnect people with that which sustains us, whether they're policymakers or just citizen scientists. This isn't science fiction. This is the reality of the age that we are in. And we are the scientists, we are the scroll bearers, and we have a really important role to build this bridge between the transcription of those things that do not have voices, like what we observe when we're in the field, both biotic and abiotic, and to be able to build that bridge. So, just on a look at this from a macro scale, the importance of collecting, digitizing data so that we can work with monitoring large scale level ecosystems, so that we can work with planning that, so that we can track how things are changing across time, looking at that from both the global perspective as well as the local perspective. But it's data that supplies that, and it's data from scientists like yourselves when we are out in the field, we populate information on these maps, and that is going to help everything with preparedness for the future, for resilience planning, etc. We also want to look at this on the micro scale too, in the sense of all of our individual projects that we work on, whether again it's for consulting for some potential impact that may affect some water or place that is sensitive, such as a wetland, or if we are working on it from the regulatory side or from the management side. What we're looking at is the importance of converting or translating biological data, places that do not have a voice in human council, in human policy, bringing that to a place where people can hear it. That is what we do, you know, and I invite you to just remember that, because many of us, that's why we started on this path. We started on this path to bring the voice of the voiceless to where it needs to be heard. So the original vision, years working in the U.S. Forest Service and doing long corridor projects, I can think of many times where I got so frustrated with all the paper forms I had drawing on my dashboards, whatever I was doing, everything was a mess. I wanted to have my own personal R2 unit, so that's why I threw this screen up here. I wanted something that would, record all the data, perform calculations, so that I could focus on looking at patterns, that I could focus on interpreting the data and expressing that in both scientific terms, but in a layperson's terms, so that that could then convert to policy or to decision making. One of the things that I think is really critical to point out is that while I was thinking of this process, my co-founder, Lee Lance, pointed out to me that the little computer that I already had in my pocket, my smartphone, was actually more powerful than the massive computer that NASA used to direct the landing on the moon. I think that's a pretty cool thing to think about, is that you have that much power in your pocket, and most people are just using it to text one another and to send pictures and do this sort of thing. Like, what if we actually use that computer for the power that it actually has, and what impact that can have on our planet? So our focus today with the convergence of wetland science and tech, we're going to look at how we're leveraging that tech in wetland science, and how that's rapidly changing the way we as scientists collect data, how we make observations, process, model that data geospatially, and how that then helps influence policy, planning, and natural resource management. So we're going to explore a little bit deeper into some drones, GPS receivers, GIS software, data collection apps, and a few other new tools that are coming forward, that are being shaped by our industry and being shaped for our industry. So I think it's a great marriage of what we're looking at here. So I am first going to just talk with you a little bit about drones, and of course, drones is what people who don't use drones call them for the most part. Most people are calling them unmanned aircraft systems now, or unmanned aerial vehicles. I think drones still works for me, but we'll kind of leave it at that. But a lot of companies, maybe some that are on the call here right now, is that some companies are already offering this as a service to help on the macro scale to be able to look at where wetland extents are and what that looks like. Being able to look at higher resolution optics to be able to provide better models and information for clients, customers, for mitigation monitoring programs to look at. But also looking at near infrared, looking at thermal sensors, looking at LiDAR. These are all different ways that we can gather information for large scale projects and minimize the costs that we're looking at. that I want to look at with this one. Looks like it froze up again. Give me a second. I think it has something to do with the chat panel. Let's see if we can, there we go. All right, so the drone that I'm most familiar with, that I own and that we use mostly for the Cloud Forest project, is the DJI Phantom SR6. Not the highest grade drone available, but definitely highly functional, ties in with the GPS and with GNSS systems so that you can help navigate by satellite. I'm still manually flying that with a remote control. We are using the drones down in the Cloud Forest to have a better understanding of impacts to the edge of the Cloud Forest. So in the picture in the lower part of the screen here, you can see where the dynamic canopy of the old growth forest is in relationship to the edge of milpa style farming, where they burn it every few years and are planting corn. Again, this is in the highlands of Guatemala on a karst, so limestone based soils. The imagery that we've been able to get from this, both in terms of the extent of the original forest, as well as impact areas on the edge, have been incredible. And we've also been able to utilize this to get down into some of the tops of the canopies that we've not been able to climb up into with some of our climbing gear in order to record species in the top. We do have trail cameras set up in the Cloud Forest, and we do have trail cameras, or I'll say canopy cameras set up in the canopies for some of the species that never come down from the forest canopy. But large focus here is looking at the intact habitat, looking at the endangered species that require this type of habitat, like the spider monkey and the horned guan. We have found that this SR6 does great in terms of recording the type of imagery that we're looking for, and can help then be brought into geospatial modeling to look at longer term planning with the stakeholders who live on the fringes of this gorgeous natural community in Guatemala. All right, GPS receivers. I'm sure we could probably name off a few dozen different GPS receivers that everyone that's in the room right now utilizes. Probably the one that I hear about people using most frequently are Tremolo units, but also a lot of people use EOS and Garmin, Spectras, as well as a handful of others. I think the thing that's really important to touch in here is just a reminder, or if you aren't aware of this, the level of accuracy or the grade type of different GPS units that are available. We essentially have 4 different grades of GPS unit. There's the military and government grade, which gets very, very sub-centimeter accuracy grade. And then your second grade, of course, is your professional grade, which would be split into 2 groups. You've got your survey grade, which is purportedly accurate to centimeter. And then you've got your mapping grade, which is, of course, going to be sub-meter accurate. So I'm, of course, going to be most familiar with the mapping grade, because that's typically what we are using in any of the field studies that I am involved with, although I have been a part of holding the pole for some survey grade level as well. Now, of course, we've got our final group, which is your portable navigation devices, which are, you might be more familiar with from using in boats or in cars. They are consumer recreation grade, not a high level of accuracy. But the one thing that I want to pull out from those 4 that is different and is what is at the cutting edge of things right now are GPS devices that are pairing to smartphones and to tablets. And so that's going to be what our next case study here is about. And so what we're looking at here is a unit built by Tremolo. It's called the R1. I've been using it for a little over a year and a half now. You can see how big it is by the in the picture up in the upper right corner. It fits into a nice little case with a clip that I can clip onto my belt or onto the shoulder pad of my shoulder pack. And once you have that synced up, you get the sub-meter accuracy, as you can see from the picture in the upper right. Also, there is no screen on your GPS device. There's no stylus that you have to click around through a bunch of different menus. It is a GPS receiver, a very good one, but it ties into some type of software that you can Bluetooth with your smartphone or with your iPad. And so in this particular case, in the lower picture, I have it Bluetooth to the Ecobond app. And so I don't know if you can see my cursor or not, but down here in the lower 2/3 is where the GPS location is. And then any outputs from the GPS receiver are going to depend on the software that it's interacting with. I know that some people pair the R1 with some more general type of data collection apps, or even a GPS receiver type of app. But you do need to have something that you're pairing with in your device in order to get that information. Export is going to completely depend on what the software is that you're interacting with. So as I mentioned, I'm interacting with Ecobond, and with Ecobond, my export right now is a CSV file, although we have been field testing this week and last week the addition of being able to create polygons, polylines, etc. within the app. So we're going to be able to export shape files now, which then will be directly importable to some type of GIS software. But overall, these new units that are being produced by other companies besides Tremble that allow you to Bluetooth are allowing us as scientists to be more agile, to collect sub-meter accurate data and have a smaller amount of material that we're carrying around with us in the field. Now we jump on to the next one. So GIS software. I'm betting that most people on the call use some type of GIS software. Some people don't. I still have one of the PhD geologists that I have worked with in Kentucky and Ohio and Indiana over the years. He still likes to scan in a USGS map and use a black marker, a Sharpie marker around the edge of it. It works, you know, it tells somebody where you are. But as we all know, many agencies are expecting us to have some level of live or recorded geospatial data that can better describe the project areas that we're looking at. Again, whether that's for conservation, for monitoring, or for some sort of assessment or delineation. So there are a lot of different types of GIS software that are out there and available. There's a lot of open source things. It can be a little more complicated. And for those of you who have gone through this drill, you can spend a lot of hours digging around looking for the proper shape files if you don't have them already stored, or if you're working outside of an area that you typically work in. Some of the folks that we team with at the Collider, which is our co-working space that Ecobond is based out of here in Asheville, have built some of their own systems, and that's with the University of North Carolina, Asheville, and their NEMAC organization here. But what I want to talk about is what I'm using now. I've been using ArcMap from Esri for years, and for the last 2 years I've been using ArcGIS Pro. There's a little bit of a learning curve switching from ArcMap to ArcGIS Pro, but I think I've got the basics now enough that I can get in trouble. We definitely have enough people around in the office that can work with ArcGIS Pro on a much more complicated basis in terms of building heat maps and looking at multiple different layers of data. What we're looking at here is just a very basic WOTUS study, or Waters of the United States study in Missouri. Here, basically, all we have are parcel files or parcel layers, which are turned off, and in the background, you have high resolution aerial photographs, and then we have polylines for the streams, and then we have added polylines for where streams were found to be piped underground. And then you can see that there's a small wetland area that was recorded in the upper right. I'm sorry, in the upper center part of the screen there. And with this, I was, again, in order to collect the live data in the field to then import into ArcGIS Pro, I was using the R1 paired with Ecobond in order to pull that data in and create that wetland cell. I think I'm going to leave it at that for now, because I feel like ArcGIS is probably something most people are familiar with, but I felt like it was crucial to talk about that in context, because in a way, not just ArcGIS and Esri products, or Esri products in general, and other open source GIS software, they have come to play a critical role in all of our lives in the sense of our work. And the interesting thing about that is that, of course, GIS and GPS have added a significant amount of work to our scope of work for particular projects, because now we have to, of course, have time planned into all projects for either our GIS team or for whoever on our team is going to focus on the GIS work for creating the models and having that live data. But the beauty of that, of course, is that this is a huge step in terms of receiving the data that we are digitizing in the field and sending up to clouds or sending up to various agencies, and therefore can potentially become information that's available to the general public, to planners, to policymakers, and to other scientists who are doing this work. So let's talk about data collection apps. So this is something that's a little bit newer on the horizon. Some people have played around with a few things in recent years that have started to set a tone. But one thing, again, to go back to my R2D2 story and the computer, is recognizing that I'm going in the field, I already have this phone in my pocket. And so a derivative of just sense is that it would make sense to be able to collect the observations that I'm making in the field through that device. And then once I have a data connection again, to be able to send that to some sort of storage place that will turn that data into something usable, a report, a graph, a model. So right now in the general marketplace, there's a lot of different options for different types of data collection apps. You have a mix of consumer versus professional grade apps. So like one example of that would be like a consumer grade app might be something like iNaturalist, which is an amazing application that is really doing a great job in crowdsourcing and bringing together both lay people as well as scientists. But it's not being driven just by scientists, whereas something like Ecobond or Wetform might be something that would be specific to a particular profession, such as wetland delineation, wetland scientists, which allow us to increase our efficiency or level of work. There's also the difference between off-the-shelf versus custom apps. So off-the-shelf is a very generalized, maybe you can create a PDF form of some sort, or perhaps it's just a general place that you can store data that can then be held for later on. Whereas a custom app, again, is going to be something that's specifically built for a specific type of workflow, like monitoring a wetland mitigation site or delineating a potential wetland site for a jurisdictional determination. But these data collection apps, of course, are being tucked into phones and tablets and can bring in all varying degrees of levels of efficiency and for increasing collaborative efforts. So, not a surprise, I'm going to talk about Ecobond as the case study here, because I've been a part of building this for the last couple of years. We're going into our third field season. We just this past December launched in the Apple App Store. Pretty excited about that. We again are hearing that people are saving 50 to 60% of their time on projects. Very excited about that. Excited about the new capability of modeling and collecting wetland cells and in units while out in the field, while being offline. That was a really critical component of building Ecobond, was something that would work completely offline. So because I work in the field, you all work in the field, you know that most of the time that we're out there, we're not going to be in an area that has service. Or as you can see in that lower picture, sometimes we get under big tree canopies, and even in springtime, like this time of year now, when the leaves have not fully come in, even if you are in a data coverage area, a lot of times it can get broken up and can be a major drain on batteries. So again, Ecobond is focused on specifically on wetland mitigation monitoring, as well as on wetland delineations. And so we are helping you collect that data into a format which auto produces your Army Corps of Engineers wetland delineation forms, and it has those prepared and tucked as a PDF to submit as part of your determination report to the Corps. And so I want to just final coverage and tuck here into what is up and coming. There's a company called Upstream that is playing a little bit with how machine learning and artificial intelligence can help with the potential monitoring of wetland sites, as well as potential outgrowth of what those might look like. Also, case study here, which is something I'm going to look into. I'd be really curious if anybody has played with one of these yet. Munsell Capture. It's a little handheld unit. You can see in the upper picture there that it is supposedly replacing what we're doing with our Munsell color charts. I have a lot of doubts around it, especially since a lot of the soils that we're dealing with in wetlands can be pretty complicated. But I'm looking forward to playing with that this summer, because again, this will Bluetooth to my smartphone. And so hypothetically, we could also make it drop data directly into Ecobond or into other applications that might collect your data directly. So anyway, yeah, I would be interested offline after this conversation, or in the conversation we're going to have here in a few minutes, to hear if anyone has had a chance to play with this yet, so we can maybe trade war stories. So want to just start to sum things up here and talk and kind of round off. So we've taken a review of some case studies here of things that are already influencing the way we conduct wetland science and the perceived trajectory of the near future. But I'd like to, again, just stress the importance of building technology from inside our industry, from wetland scientists, and the importance of that. Because I know in a lot of the conservation work that I've been involved with, that it can be really disconcerting when an outsider is telling insiders, or when a scientist from wealthy North America is telling local stakeholders in Guatemala how they're going to do things going forward that will potentially impact their land, their civilization, and natural resources. It's really important that that relationship is built between us and the indigenous people before anything else. Or in another situation where policymakers who do not heed data and science in the decision making around critical resources such as waters of the United States. It's really important that we're building this from the inside out. So just going to briefly take a look at what is so important about creating this from inside from crowdsourcing from wetland scientists like yourself in building technology that doesn't add to our additional workload, but either augments it, such as GIS software, or makes it more efficient, such as some of the other tools that we've been talking about. So I think the thing that's most important here is just to understand that as we build things from the inside out, we all want to make our jobs easier, not more complicated. So with Ecobond, my current organization, we are utilizing the build, measure, learn feedback loop developed by Toyota in the 1930s. It converts quite easily into our sector in the sense of we are looking at how we can minimize wasted time and effort while maximizing efficiency, and doing that from inside. How do the people that we work with, how do other wetland scientists like yourself help us to learn how to make something better? How do we make an aggregate of the best suite of tools that are possible? And so with the help of our peers such as you, we continue to help refine that. So I just want to close with talking about a couple things in respect to where things may be going. I've got this old World War II era cipher machine that I threw up here. This was used to send cryptic messages along the front. Oh, it's extremely outdated. It's a great reminder of where things are going. So, we may be able to create massive levels of efficiency inside of our industry, but what we are hearing from a lot of the regulatory agencies is that they are interested in how they can also move on that level of efficiency as well. Like, how can they receive the cryptic message from our different tools so that they don't have to receive a hard copy or a PDF copy and then have to pull it apart and then turn it back into a digital format? How can they receive what we are creating and turn that into something that will be useful and digitized for them as well? And so with that, I just want to leave you with a bookend of another quote by William Pollard. And quote is, "Learning and innovation go hand in hand. The arrogance of a success is to think that what you did yesterday will be sufficient for tomorrow." So I believe as a collaboratory society of wetland scientists that we can help shape an amazing future filled with vital, healthy wetlands and play a critical role in building the bridge between humans in the 21st century, divorced from that direct biological connection in a lot of ways, and create a better future together. So
excellent. Thank you very much, Jeremy. We're getting close on time. We have about 10 minutes. And I do have several questions. And so we'll get right to the Q&A. Let me see here for a second. I'm trying to share my screen. Are you all seeing my screen now?
I am.
Okay, good. All right, you see a picture of you, right?
Look at that guy.
Excellent. Okay. I am going to also need to put this up here. All right, so I do have a few questions from the audience, and then I'm going to ask you a few of my own. So we have one here where somebody asked, do you find the external Bluetooth receivers are as good as the Tremolo handhelds, especially in stream valleys or forested canopy?
Yeah, great question. So I have found that it can be, but what you need to do is you need to have some sort of application on your phone or your tablet that is set up so that you can have an understanding of how accurate the reading is at the time that you're taking the measurement. So if I'm out in the field and I'm moving really quickly and I'm not paying attention to what the connection is, sometimes that can be just standing in place, for a minute while you're recording your other data, then collecting your location. Oftentimes I found that works. So I have found that it is fairly accurate. I have not done a side-by-side though. That would be a fun study to do. So maybe I'll get out one of the Geo7Xs and do a side by side and see how close the points land on top of each other. Yeah, there's some homework for me.
I'm already just amazed. See, I'm using the Bluetooth on my phone, so you said things can even talk to each other. Yeah, thanks for writing that down. I have a somewhat another kind of tech question here on which smartphone model survives best in the field. Okay, so keep in mind that I think we learned that the good guys have iPhones in the movies and the bad guys have anything else. So you're not allowed to endorse any particular phone model, I suppose, but someone would like to know that.
Well, I guess, I mean, I'm on a PC ecosystem, but I do use an iPhone. I keep my phone in an OtterBox case. A lot of phones now are being made to where they're waterproof, so you can drop them in the wetland, drop them in the mud, and just got to clean them up then. So I have found that the combination, I have an iPhone 8, it's in a OtterBox case, and when I take it out of the OtterBox case, it still looks brand new. So I think it's doing its job, and I still spend a lot of time in the field.
Excellent. And I have just recently came into this century and got myself the Android S10, which is supposed to be somewhat water resistant, and I have not either intentionally or accidentally tried that out to see if it really is. So that's something else they can keep in mind. I have a question too about the Arc products, the Esri products, on comparing ArcGIS Pro and ArcMap. Can you compare those, and why would you use one over the other?
Well, I always like to be candid. GIS Pro simply replaced ArcMap because somehow it got installed onto my computer, and ArcMap seemed like it was slowing down anyway. I mean, part of me, even though I am in tech, I tend to like to stay with tools that I already know how to use, and so it took me a minute. So there's the honest answer. Now that I've been using GIS Pro for a year and a half, almost 2 years, I like it better because a lot of the base maps are already available within the online ecosystem. And so I can build a base map so much faster than I could before. And now that I'm also syncing my data directly from my device through Ecobond into my base models, like I don't have to plug my GPS device into a computer, into something else, to then translate it into a shapefile and then turn it, like I can just dump it in. And so something that used to be a 4-hour process is now takes me 5 to 7 minutes. So time savings is probably a big part of it.
So the Water Management District, there are several people in our IT and people that are more focused on using the ArcMap tools and the ArcGIS Pro. So they have sort of beta versions for it. I still use ArcMap, and I understand it has a pretty big learning curve, the ArcGIS Pro. So I think maybe it depends on, it may save you time eventually, but you've got to put in the investment, right, to learn the new one.
I would definitely say it wasn't like an intuitive switch. It was like, okay, this is where things are going. This is what I need to do. I certainly spent a fair amount of time watching videos like, wait, how do I layer these two things over? How do I clip these files? And so, yeah, that was a little frustrating initially. I know the basics now, so I can get myself in trouble by being able to focus on all the projects that I'm working on. But, I think the GIS has become its own career track at this point. I mean, it was just something that we all had as an addendum or as a certificate or something that we had focused on the side in order to understand how to work it. But yeah, I think we're probably going to see that become more complicated with time. I mean, some of the products that I saw Esri demo out at their Geodesign Summit a couple months ago, like incredible. Like it looks like you're in a video game. You're like walking through a wetland. I mean, it's crazy, but it's really neat.
Virtual, right?
It's virtual, and that's what's going to speak to the next generation of scientists coming up. And it's going to be a big part of how conservation works going forward in the future.
Yeah. Well, actually, you kind of segued into a question that I had for you, and that was, what one thing would you encourage students or young professionals just starting out in the world of wetlands? I mean, what skills would you encourage them? And I know I always tell students, especially, learn GIS, learn ArcGIS, or ArcMap, so that you have that skill set for spatial analyses, ecological spatial analyses in wetlands. But is there any other one thing that you would say is one of the skills that you think is just critical to learning for these people just now getting into it?
I mean, I'd actually say two things. The first thing would be, I think it's critical that you hone in on a specific, whether it's a specific taxa or the identification. I mean, yes, applications are going to continue to get smarter, like iNaturalist, like you and I have been talking about offline, Kim.
Mm-hmm.
And there's going to be all these shortcuts, but there's part of me that's also very old-fashioned. I mean, on the weekends, I'm out bow hunting and catching crawfish and sitting around a fire, cooking whatever I can collect out in the mountains here to eat. Like, I think it's critical that we continue to learn the actual earth skills and earth sciences that are what are providing that bridge of data up to, because they're critical for humanity.
Yeah.
You got to be able to navigate.
I definitely
be able to navigate someplace without a GPS. Like, I don't know,
right.
I'm sure there's people on this call that are this way too, but like, I'll use my GPS if I have to, but I'm still going by memory. Like, if I've identified a rare plant out in the wild, like, I'll get to it way faster than people will with GPSs, just by remembrance of shape of landscape, how the soil feels underneath my feet. Like, keep honing those skills too. Critical.
Right. Yeah, we do get too reliant on those types of things, that's for sure.
Yes,
although they're critical, I remember having to navigate before we had an iPad out on an airboat to ground truthing sites. And now that I had an airboat, I could see the channels of the river. I could get up around this little patch of trees, and so it made it amazingly easier. But you're right, you still have to kind of keep that connection. Yeah, there you go. See what others can't. I do want to say there's someone online talking about the use of the R1. Kurt agrees with the use of the R1. He uses the R1 with Collector and GNSS status utility app.
Yep.
Accuracy is usually 22 to 32 inches and corrected on the fly, and it helps you in the face. If you face south and it seems and stand somewhere for 10 seconds, it works fine. But later also said, why not use Collector with an R1 and set up maps through ArcGIS Online, which is free with GIS, versus paying $3,000 a year for electronic data sheet? That's what his question is on that.
Yeah, I think it's, each person's going to have their own particular way they like to focus on their workflow. I mean, again, with Ecobond, what we have found is that the amount of time saved by having everything tucked into one place is a fraction of what is saved on budgets, or what could be gained back in additional potential profit for companies that are doing it for consulting, and for regulatory agencies. Just the time savings is just massive.
Right. Well, I'm going to have one more kind of lead out question, and then we'll have to kind of finish up the webinar. Just have a couple announcements and we're done. This is my last question for you. You've made this jump from the gap of, doing physical things with physical paper and going into digital, right? And you can go from sticking delineation flags in the ground, right, and calling in a survey versus using a Tremble to mark the wetland, or you can, go from something to using the Ecobond app versus paper notes or something like that. So you feel comfortable making that jump or bridging the gap between the physical and digital. I mean, how did you get to that point with being comfortable with all this technology? And I think we just talked a little bit about it, being able to rely on it. You're not completely reliant on it, from what you're saying.
Yeah, well, let's go with a metaphor. I mean, I rely on the engineers who designed and built my car. Every day I get in the car and I pull out and I drive to work, and I plug it in when there's a plug-in available, and I fill up gas when I need to fill up gas. But at one point we were all using horses and carts. At one point before that, we were all using chariots, or we were walking everywhere. So it's just a matter of, like, there's a bell curve for the adoption of anything, and some people are going to be early adopters, and some people are never going to be adopters. I mean, I could go be an Amish guy and just build all my everything with hand tools, and I like doing that. But when it comes to getting in my car, I love having that tool and resource available. It saves me a lot of time and allows me to have the lifestyle that I live. So that said, flipping that back around, it's the same thing with working with technical tools. It's just a shift in evolution of where things are going. Some people are going to be early adopters. Some people are going to be late adopters. Some people will never adopt, and that's fine. And I think for the most part, most agencies are set up to receive information at this point in time. Most district core offices, not all, some of them are requiring digital at this point, but that's where we are. It's the name of the game right now.
Right. Well, and I think some of us go kicking and screaming into some of the technological advances. I would admit that I have done that before, and then when we get there, we go, wow, this is amazing. But the thing is that we have that ground in how hard it used to be. And so sometimes I hope that doesn't get lost in the in the mix. I mean, you spoke about iNaturalist, and I am the first one to sing its praises. I love it. I also have a very big background in botany, so I kind of know what I'm looking at, but I fear that sometimes it's too easy when I'm trying to identify something I don't know. To just go, oh, okay, that's what it is. But you know what? I didn't work through it. I didn't take the seeds out. I didn't look at it under a microscope. I didn't really inspect it the way I would have had I not had that app to tell me what it was that quickly. So I think it's a balancing act of keeping your feet firmly and having those skills and that knowledge data set, but then using the digital world to be able to do things faster and more efficiently. So I really appreciate, Jeremy, that you took time out of your schedule. I know it's kind of a crazy time in history right now, and it's good that we're able to have technology to be able to connect with each other, the wetland community. So thank you for your expertise and your insights for that. For those people who are seeking to learn about how to use technology to enhance our efforts in wetland science and management. So thank you for that, Jeremy. And I'm going to have to do a couple of announcements before we sign off. One thing I want to correct, Tony from the SWS staff reminded me that we have switched our survey to a Survey Monkey, which should probably come with your email that follows up with the recording of the webinar. So you won't get it right when you close your webinar today. And I want to make sure that you guys know what's coming up. Our next SWS webinar will be held on May 21st. Presented by Elliot White from the University of Virginia. He's going to be presenting on his work on the effects of saltwater intrusion on coastal floodplain swamps in the northern Gulf Coast. And our next Spanish webinar will be held on June 24th, and it'll be presented by Brigitte van Tussenbroek and Ricardo Wong from the National Autonomous University of Mexico, speaking about zoobenthophilia. And as a reminder, all our Spanish webinars are offered free of charge to members and non-members alike. And then finally, I want to make sure that you all subscribe or follow SWS social media channels like Facebook and LinkedIn to keep informed and support the society. We also have a YouTube channel where all our webinars are posted 3 months after their original broadcast with multilingual subtitles. So you could even go to one of those Spanish webinars if you don't speak Spanish like me, and you could go ahead and see that. And one of our newly added things that we're doing are these wetland interviews. Please check that out. I think they were advertised in the newsletter you all received yesterday. We have one in English and one in Spanish right now, and they're posted to our YouTube page. So you can go there by looking under resources and wetland interviews. And if you're Spanish speaking, make sure you subscribe to our Latin America and Caribbean regions Facebook page at the link listed here. And then thanks again to Jeremy for his presentation, to our 2 webinar sponsors, and thank you to you, our audience, for participating today. So thank you again, Jeremy. And have a wonderful day, I suppose you were muted, Jeremy.
I was, sorry. Yeah, you bet. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful day, and we hope to see you at our next SWS webinar. Stay well.